All right, got everybody. We're going to have a couple of minutes waiting for people to join us in the room. But for those who have instantly popped up, welcome to Doc Edge Schools as part of the 15th annual Doc Edge Documentary Film Festival program. We're very excited to show you some super cool movies. And if you're signed up, you have access to all of our films in the Doc Edge Schools program for as long as you want to watch whenever you want up until July the 3rd. But we do encourage you to join us for the Q&A sessions. I can see we've got a couple of people with us here. Welcome to Doc Edge Schools. Who have
Sorry
we
to
got in the
interrupt
audience?
you,
Give us
Matt, but can you see yourself as the session started?
I can see myself. I believe the session has started. Yeah.
Okay.
Am I not visible to you, Alicia?
Oh, it just says for me that it's still starting. So I'm going to refresh. Don't mind me.
Okay, cool. Well, welcome everybody to Doc Edge Schools. You can obviously see now on widescreen with Alicia gone, my fridge and my TV and my background. But if you're in the room, please, hey Sasha, welcome. Yes, if you're joining us from a school, please go to the chat room and type in a hi, how are you, so we know who's in the house. I believe we are expecting. I'm not sure how to pronounce your name, Avi Wilson from Onslow College, Michelle Burstel from the Auckland University Psychology Department, Nikki Muir from Carmel High, and Sasha from South Seas. Hey, Sasha. And
Hi,
as well as
Sasha.
a
Oh,
few other Auckland Uni guests. So yeah, what have we watched this morning? We watched We Believe in Dinosaurs about the conflict of church and state, religion and politics. Very timely, and it kind of matches with this one, Unfit, about the presidency of United States President Donald J. Trump, or Trump as he changed his name to. Just a fun little side fact.
can we
Um,
do a mini shout out to the TikTokers and the K-pop fans who bought fake tickets to Trump's rally? I think that's so funny, and I love creative activism.
can you tell us a little bit more about that, Alicia? Like I know a little bit about it, but people in the audience might not. What happened?
Oh, so K-pop fans, the K-pop fandom are really good at changing like hashtags and trends, and
For a start, though, what is K-pop for anybody who might not know what K-pop is?
so it's kind of like my understanding is it's like a Korean style of music and dance. But yeah, so K-pop fans and TikTokers decided to buy a bunch of face, fake tickets to Donald Trump's rally, and so he and his people thought that there was going to be 1 million people, and they had this overflow room for because the main room could only fit 22,000 people approximately.
Crowds, huge crowds, tremendous crowds.
Yeah, the greatest crowds, the best crowds. But then only just over 6,000 people showed up because they were all fake tickets. And I saw a tweet from a mum who was kind of shouting out to her son because he was kind of just like, she says he was just scrolling and she's like, oh, I heard that like, TikTokers bought fake tickets. And her son was like, yeah, I know. I bought a couple myself. And I was like, yeah,
I
go
know,
young
like
people.
to Trump, it's his narcissism which um, so overwhelms any sense of normalcy and logic that he needs big crowds. Because he's a populist president. He needs lots and lots of people and lots of um, admiration and validation. So when he was speaking to a reduced sized crowd, that would have got to him. And I think that's an excellent example of young people using new tools, new digital tools to undermine a president who's been doing some pretty dubious things around the world.
Yeah, and I love it because I think a lot of people are wanting to engage in politics right now. Like people who aren't even old enough to vote yet are wanting to. I think a lot of us have been, sitting at home or you just being like, I want to do something. And so, they done did that.
Well, we love young people's creativity, and we are going to show you some great documentaries. Today is Unfit, and that might give you a bit of an impression about what people are doing through digital storytelling. Documentaries are a great way to share your thoughts and ideas and to communicate to a wider audience. So, firstly, I'd like to thank Ray Foundation, who have made the entire Doc Edge Schools program possible, as well as everybody from Doc Edge who has worked so hard to transition this in the craziest of times to get our theatre program to online. So here we are. Welcome to the digital house. Onslow College, Auckland Uni, Camor, South Seas, thank you so much for joining us here. We're going to push play in just a second. Hopefully you're all set up to push play okay. If you have any problems, you can email myself or Alicia and we'll get you set up and talk you through any tech gremlins. Um, but do stick around for afterwards. We'll be having a question and answer session with Danny Osborne from Auckland University, who is a political psychologist. So should be an interesting conversation. Come back after the credits and we'll have a great conversation about Trump and other figures from history who displayed these kind of psychological traits. Any last thoughts from you before we begin, Alicia?
No, I'm looking forward to the conversation. I think we had a really great conversation with Danny Osborne last week, and so it's going to be cool to have him back again. Yeah, I learn something new every time. So,
Well,
yeah.
for all the students and all the teachers, I hope we all learn something new together. Okay, so if you go to the link that Alicia has just posted, schools.docedge.nz film unfit, and click that, then hover your cursor over the pink play now button. And when I say go, we'll all push play together and come back during the credits for the Q&A. So,
Keep,
three.
keep this page
Mhm.
open. Sorry, Matt. Keep this page open. Matt and I are going to turn our mics and our cameras off, but we're going to come straight back here. So don't leave this page.
That's the one. And just so you know, the film file is 10 minutes shorter than what was advertised. So we'll be back in 1 hour 15 minutes, and that'll give us a bit better conversation time. So when you're ready, hover the cursor over the pink play now button, and 3, 2, 1, play now. Push play if it doesn't automatically start. See you back for Q&A after. Enjoy the show. Okay, if we can have everyone back in the room, we would love to kick off the conversation. If Onslow College, Kamua High, and South Seas are here, we'd love to begin the conversation. So, welcome, Danny Osborne from Auckland University. We are very, very thrilled to have you here. We've spoken once before at one of the previous sessions, but if you could just introduce yourself again, who you are, what you do, to the audience, then we'll start with the questions.
Cool. Thank you very much for involving me in this process. I'm really thrilled and honored to be a part of the Doc Edge series this year. My name is Danny Osborne, and I teach at the University of Auckland, and my specialty is on political psychology. So while I'm not a clinical psychologist, my background is more in politics and really the psychology behind why people vote the way they vote. So obviously a movie about Donald Trump was quite appealing to me, and I'm quite honored to be able to speak to you today.
Fantastic. And I think Alicia's just posted here in the comments as well for any of the teachers or students who may have questions, please do either type them into the chat box here, or if you're feeling brave, you can use this icon, which is the speak icon, and we can bring you up live on camera. If you've got a laptop or a webcam or something like that, we can engage more direct. But for the meantime, do feel free to type your questions in to the chat box. So yes, I'm not sure if I've thanked the Ray Foundation again yet, but we want to acknowledge Ray Foundation's contribution to make all of Doc Edge schools possible and to keep people like Alicia and myself going and helping share these important pieces of information, not only about current events but historical events as well. So on that note, Danny, like what? There were some correlations drawn between past historical figures who displayed the same kind of personality traits and behaviors, um, and some of those historical figures weren't necessarily very sympathetic figures, and
Mhm.
history has taught us that that kind of leads to trouble. What, yeah, what are your thoughts about Donald Trump's current fitness to lead the United States?
Um, yeah, I mean, in terms of his mental competence, I can't really speak to that. Although there was an interesting quote. I was reading this morning that I thought would be interesting for our conversations today. So this was something that John McCain's. It wound up not showing up on my phone, but John McCain recently, one of John McCain's former campaign advisors, came forward and had this really scathing review of the Trump administration and just basically called him out for his complete lack of competence to govern in a society. And I think looking at his effectiveness of a leader might be, in my opinion, more productive than questioning whether or not he's mentally competent or not. And I think it also provides a clearer criteria to evaluate his performance while in office. You know, we can look at the policies he's enacted or not enacted if we're looking at his response to COVID-19 and judge his performance based on that, rather than trying to infer some psychological dispositions from some of his questionable behaviors.
Yeah, and some of that behavior is certainly questionable and
Mhm.
looks to be um, the product of a psychological deficiency. But as we know, politics is a show. You know, it's very much. We have another film in the festival called Influence, and it's about the machinations behind the scenes of a PR company and how they instruct global leaders to behave and what to say, and feed them lines and so on. So, I mean, it's important to be aware that whatever comes out of a um, a world leader's mouth isn't necessarily their own words or their own thoughts or their own behavior. I mean, historically in the States, we've had Ronald Reagan as an actor.
Yeah.
He was literally an actor, um, and now Donald Trump, who has been the star of a reality TV show. You
Mhm.
know, these people seem more modeled to be entertainers or presenters uh, than actual political figures. What are your thoughts on that about whether they are mouthpieces for an agenda or whether they have ascended through the political levels to actually have a strong, unique point of view politically?
Well, I mean, first off, I completely agree with you in terms of uh, the caution that we need to take when looking at an actor versus a politician. I mean, Donald Trump, his entire sort of celebrity is built around his reality show appearances and his hosting of The Apprentice. And I think in some ways that's really what propelled him into office. You know, he was a well-known name, even though I think David Letterman once referred to him as, you know, just this buffoon who would come on to the Letterman show, and he just loved the limelight. You know, regardless of whether or not you were making fun of him. If he was on the David Letterman, the Late Show or whatever, he just reveled in the attention that he was receiving. And so I think in that sense, you have to wonder whether or not there's any political ideology behind the various policies that he's enacted since taking office. And you know, John Bolton has this book that's coming out in the next couple of days that is also a pretty scathing rebuke of Donald Trump's poor temperament and lack of coherence in the types of positions that he takes on really important policy positions regarding national security. And you can't have somebody in office who is changing their opinion from day to day, from hour to hour. It just creates chaos. And as we've seen since he's taken office, the international community has had to kind of hold their breath during this administration. In some ways, hope for it to pass quickly.
Given how we've seen the social, the Cambridge Analytica involvement in getting Trump elected, there's been some meddling with Russian influence there as well. Chaos has certainly been sown in American political life and civil life as well. And how do you think that the next election is going to play out, given that there seems to be a strong polarization within American civil life now, of people taking strong positions and sometimes from very closed-minded points of view versus people trying to bring history into play, and it seems like a chaotic country, right?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, well, I think there's two different ways to look at this at the moment. So there is evidence that Russia is also trying to interfere in the 2020 election. We know that from research suggesting that they were trying to help Bernie Sanders get elected. Bernie Sanders, I think, did the right thing and came out and said, I'm uncomfortable with this. I don't want Russia to be helping me. This is an issue. And I think it the fact that they were trying to help Bernie Sanders this time around really goes to show you that, or I think it disproves the idea that Trump is a puppet of Russia. I think at the end of the day, Russia was wanting to sow distrust within the political institutions of the US. And one way to do that would be to get somebody with little to no political experience elected to the highest office of the land, to capitalize on this polarization. So I think that's also an important point to make, is that it was capitalizing on something that was already inherent in the public. So there's data going back 30 years that shows the beginning of this polarization process, and Donald Trump is just another point along that line of polarization.
So where do you think that polarization stemmed from so long ago? Like, it did seem like there was a legitimate rejection from Heartland USA, if you like, of the neoliberalism of Obama and Clinton and even the Bushes. It all seemed to be much of a muchness, where American jobs were being shipped overseas, and good old, the good old USA in the heartland seemed to be diminishing, and the unemployment was rising, and there was that real kind of white middle class feeling of we're okay diminishing as people were increasingly cornered. Do you think that Trump's election, there was a legitimate feeling in the population where they were like, we want something else than the status quo? Or do you think that was only a product of external meddling?
I mean, it's a great question. I think in some ways the Republican Party sowed the seeds of their own destruction years ago by fostering this sense of distrust in the media, distrust in politicians, distrust in political institutions. These were all ideas that had been floating around for quite a while. You can look back to the Tea Party movement recently, and even before that, and see that there are these ideas of distrust of people in positions of power. And so lo and behold, somebody comes forward who's claiming to drain the swamp and do all of these other quite honestly, rather radical positions, doing away with corruption in DC, and promising these things that he's never delivered on, and in fact worsened by most accounts. So in that sense, the seeds of this anti-elite movement were sown long ago. And Trump is, in essence, the kind of person who benefited most from this, I think.
Sure. Alicia, you've been listening in on all of our conversations, and as well as you've seen the movie 5 or 6 times probably now. What are some of your thoughts about the Trump's fitness to lead, but also all of some of the external factors as well?
Well, what are my thoughts on Donald Trump?
Yeah, pretty much.
No, I thought this film was really interesting, especially when they were talking about like why people would vote for him, because I think definitely, especially from New Zealand, it seemed like the most ridiculous idea, and then it happened and we were all like, what? So yeah, I really found that really interesting about the film, that people legitimately are really into Trump. And I think the idea of what one of them was saying about they will vote for someone who they don't like, but they won't vote for someone who doesn't like them. And I was just like, well, yeah. So that was something that stood out to me this time watching it, is that I was like, yeah, people, even if they don't like Trump, they'll vote for him if they feel like the other person doesn't like their demographic.
I think it's really insightful of you, Alicia. And in fact, it's one of the main trends that we've found in the literature on political psychology is they refer to partisanship as the unmoved mover. It's basically the be-all, end-all that affects political behavior. And it's a really critical, strong social identity that people feel. And so, at the beginning of Trump's candidacy, there were 16 different GOP contenders within the field. And some people have blamed the GOP for not identifying a leader earlier on in the campaign, and then focusing their resources on getting that person elected to beat out Trump. Because if they had a more establishment candidate within the ranks, Trump wouldn't have been elected. It would have been, a party before people, in essence. And once Trump ascended to the forefront of the GOP candidates, it was essentially a lost game at that point. And I think you see that a lot with what's going on with the Senate, with Mitch McConnell getting behind Trump and basically supporting everything that Trump's doing, despite the fact that he was opposed to Trump during the initial stages of the candidacy. So it's really about party identification that's driving the votes, more so than, I don't think that many people actually admire Trump. I think it's more about he's representing my political party.
Sure. I'd just like to throw open, as Alicia's just put in the chat there, if anybody has any questions out there for Danny Osborne, who's the expert in political psychology, we'd love to hear from you. And if you're feeling brave, we might even be able to bring you up on camera. But for the meantime, you're welcome just to chat us in the chat box. For those people who aren't super familiar with American politics, Danny, what is GOP?
Oh, the Grand Old Party. So it's the Republican Party, basically.
So yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. Is that it just seems so strange is that there are, for that right wing point of view in the States, there are actually some legitimate points about making an economy strong, and all of the various other different philosophical points that you can take from right wing politics. But it seems like those sensible voices and intellectual candidates are are being drowned out or have been eliminated or have been pushed to the side. And like you were saying, like some of the Republican presidential candidates just themselves, like it seemed like a dearth of political
Mhm.
talent and political mind, having a political mind. Um, do you think that within the Republican Party there's been a deliberate effort to shift what they perceive as moderate voices away to have more radical voices? And also, would you apply that to the Democratic Party as well? Because I know, when Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton were vying for the president, to be the Democratic candidate for presidency, um, Bernie Sanders seemed like way in front, and then Hillary, it seemed rigged. It seemed like weirdly undemocratic about how Hillary then took position ahead of him. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, there's also evidence that the DNC, so the Democratic National Committee, tried to actively impede Bernie Sanders' 2016 election. So he was another one of these anti-establishment candidates who was essentially trying to move the Democratic Party further to the left. And I think even though he wound up obviously not getting the candidacy, as well as losing this most recent race, I think he's been quite effective at least moving the party's platform a little further to the left, just due to the sheer energy that he was able to get out of youth voters. And so Biden, now that he's taking over the reign of the Democratic Party as the presumptive nominee, he's in essence going to have to move a little bit to the left to gain those voters that Bernie Sanders had mobilized. So in that sense, I mean, there's some potential that the left or that the Democratic Party is moving further to the left. But I think looking at the historical trends, you really see that the polarization, at least at the elite level, that is within the political candidates and within the political leaders, it's really been a right-wing movement that's propelled this polarization process.
Sure. I mean, I'd like to ask you about your thoughts on corporate influence in politics as well, because it seems like it's the same corporations who are, in some cases, dealing with both parties and different representatives within those both parties. So it's perhaps an illusion of choice of choosing between parties, and that's why there's such low voter turnout and disaffection with the political system there.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of voters do feel disenfranchised because of this. You know, you look at like corporations like Target and some of these large mega corporations within the US who donate to both the Republican and Democratic parties. It's like having your hand in both pots. And in that sense, it doesn't matter who wins because your political influence is gonna trickle down. And I think that's why, John McCain was proposing campaign finance reform for quite some time until he wound up taking on the candidacy in 2008, I think it was. But he was initially, I think they called him a maverick within the GOP or within the Republican Party. You know, somebody who was proposing campaign finance reform to prevent corporations from influencing elections. But unfortunately, it never passed muster and didn't become legislation. So yeah, I think anytime when you're having, I forget the number because it's just so exorbitant, but I think last month it was something like Biden raised $57 million in 1 month, and Trump raised something like $50 million in 1 month for a campaign. I mean, it's ridiculous how much money goes into these elections.
And how much of that money could actually be spent on alleviating some of the social ills and the poverty and the health, the crumbling health system and education system there. My gosh.
Yeah.
Um, without further stirring the pot, although I probably will, the recent conflicts um, around Black Lives Matter and around all of these kind of um, popular movements, if you like, that are growing up to point out the inequalities in American society. There was a moment, I'd be interested to hear your thought on religion and politics as well, because there seemed like a direct appeal to his religious fundamental base by tear gassing protesters who were peacefully outside a church, moved them on, and then had a Bible posed with a Bible for a photo op outside a church that didn't even know he was coming. And so he used violence and outlawed, um, well,
Public
tear
speak.
gas to clear his own citizenry on, to appeal to a broader base, uh, to counter, I guess, what people were trying to draw attention to. Um, where do you think the religious issues and the racial issues land with Trump and his behavior there?
Well, I mean, to a certain extent, the photo op that he took following the George Floyd murder and subsequent Black Lives Matters protests, you know, I, I think you're right. That was an attempt to play to the religious right and to further motivate his base. But I think at the same time, it's also highlighting the fact that his base is shrinking. So if we look at this recent rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma, or whatever, he had 6,000 people show up, or 6,200 people show up, when he was promising 100,000 people were going to be there waiting to greet him. And it turns out like some TikTok users and K-pop fans wound up spoiling his party or whatever. But I think it just goes to show you that he is starting to lose his base. And I think there were a number of religious leaders who came out and condemned him for that photo op. And some of the generals who took the photo op with him as well, they also apologized and felt that it was inappropriate that they were included in the photo op.
Well, we can see it all starting to unravel a little bit. And on one hand, it's good to see a problematic person lose power, but at the same time, that also has global implications for um, how much of a player the United States has been on the global stage. I can see there might be a question in the audience there. What can you see
Yeah,
that?
from South Seas. It says, in the US, is it possible for independent candidates to run for presidency? Or is there just not enough media push or money behind it? Cheers.
Yeah, so that's a really great question. And, within New Zealand, we have a many multi-party system. In a given election, we can have 11 or 12 different parties to choose from. And with proportional representation in parliament, some of our views, even the extreme left and the extreme right, can sometimes get seats in parliament that can then influence policy. Within the states, it's primarily a two-party system. There are every once in a while third-party candidates who run, so there's nothing against that. But often the funding just isn't there, and the level of support behind these third-party candidates never really materializes to a level that's sustainable. So when I show you how old I am, during my first election that I was eligible to vote for, Ralph Nader was running for the Green Party. And a lot of people blamed Ralph Nader for Al Gore's loss. So Ralph Nader, running for the Green Party, was a left-wing candidate and wound up taking some of the votes from Al Gore, who was the Democratic candidate, which then gave us George Bush. So a lot of people were quite frustrated with third parties in that election. And it's kind of been the same. I think the 2016 election also had a negligible but perhaps significant impact on Hillary Clinton's support.
But yeah, sure. I mean, isn't there like a need if if you feel like it's one puppet master and two puppets, that you feel like you need an outside voice, and for some of those disenfranchised voters in America who felt like all of their power was being taken away, was that Trump was the alternative option. Do you think that there's much truth in that?
Yeah, I mean, he definitely positioned himself as an outsider, and I mean, he had no political experience to speak of. So, in that sense, he really was an outsider. Unfortunately, his promise to drain the swamp wound up being quite hollow because he basically packed his cabinet with people from the swamp, and then
Full of alligators.
yeah, he gave the alligators some more food or whatever. Like it was a hollowed promise. I mean, one thing that you can attribute to Trump is he does seem to know his base pretty well, and he knows all the racial dog whistles. He knows the religious dog whistles that he can use to motivate his base. And I think the drain the swamp thing was another attempt at that.
Sure. South Seas or Carmel or Onslow, do you have any questions? Just type them into the chat. We can worry about another time. Have you got any more questions there, Alicia?
Questions from me.
Hmm. You don't have to be on the spot.
I feel like it's been a great convo. I'm going to have to think a little bit more.
That's all good. So I'm not putting you on the spot, Danny, but what's your bet for 2020?
So in stating my bet for 2020, I should tell you that I did not predict a Trump election. So take that for what it is. But looking at all the polls, assuming that nothing changes and assuming that Trump doesn't do something to undermine voter turnout, which is a big if, I think. Especially, I mean, looking at some of the primaries that are taking place at the moment. In Kentucky in particular, they've limited the number of polling stations in Black communities significantly, such that, I mean, people are lining up around enormous city blocks to try and vote. So taking all of that into consideration, the polls look horrible for Trump. I mean, he's 10 to 12% points behind Biden at the moment. And if past behavior is a good indicator of future behavior, I don't really see Trump being able to turn his fortunes around at this point.
Yeah, for sure. So from your recollection, has there actually been any provable instances of voter fraud or interference with voters, of a particular demographic who usually votes for Democrats, or in fact across the board? Has there been any concerted effort to manipulate the vote, or stymie voter turnout for one political party or the other?
So in terms of trying to undermine voter turnout, definitely there's plenty of evidence of that. The GOP benefits when voter turnout is low, and I think we've seen a lot of that in the primaries, and hopefully we don't see that in the general election in November. But keeping people at home benefits the Republican Party. In terms of whether or not there's evidence of voter fraud from mail-in ballots or other methods, there's little to no evidence of that. So it's one of those made-up conspiracies that Trump has been floating around that has literally no support behind it.
Interesting. Well, it's certainly going to be a fascinating election, given all of the turmoil and given all of the vested political interests and economic interests that go into getting a foothold in control not only of American domestic politics but international politics as well. So we might get you back at some point to have a post-election discussion.
Definitely, that'd be pretty cool.
There's a good question that's been asked here by South Seas.
Yeah, cool.
question regarding the doco. Unfit, is that some form of defamation? Where is the line drawn?
That is a very good question. I'm not really sure. I'm sure Trump would have the motivation to sue. He's definitely not afraid to sue others who attempt to do something to defame him.
And they mean unfit as in the title, calling it unfit.
Yeah, I'm not really sure about defamation laws and whatnot, but I would imagine that if there was even the possibility of him countersuing or bringing up a legal order against the documentary producers, that we will be hearing about it shortly.
Yeah, and it is an interesting question because they must be prepared to take on this kind of publicity and have some sort of legal recourse already prepared. You don't just go make a movie like this and be like, well, we'll see what happens. You have to expect from a personality like Trump. I mean, they've identified the personality traits already, that he is the type of person who will come after him. But I guess they've wagered on his diminishing power because, you can see from the type of people that they interviewed in that documentary that they actually had some pretty good inside access to members of the Republican Party, his former cabinet, and so on. So they might have some information that we don't about who's flipping to back him and who is abandoning him.
Can I
yes,
follow on from this question because it's making me ask a question. So when you have like the news and that's under like fair use, etc., and the news can basically say kind of whatever they want. Like I know that I've seen some independent news stations completely make fun of Trump and call him XYZ names. Like if it's a documentary, is that all under fair use? And are they allowed to just do that?
Yeah, I'm thinking with in regards to Michael Moore's documentaries during the Bush administration, that must have set some precedent for coming out and speaking out against a politician in power. And I'm sure there were probably things in before that in terms of like the independence of the news outlets and stuff, allowing for a free press. So it's probably protected under the First Amendment rights, would be my guess. It's not to say that he won't try to sue, but there should be some legal protection there.
Yeah, I know in terms of fair use, you are more strongly covered if it's to do with current events, particularly political events, and so on. And there must be some foundation for the assertions that you make. Libelous is completely baseless without evidence. But yeah, in terms of journalism, you like how the news do it. There must be some element of balance that goes along with it. In fact, I think ironically, the Fox News show "Fair and Balanced" is actually terminology which is used within the Fair Use Act. So it's either walking a very fine line. I mean, they haven't put any pretense forward that this is not that this is a pro-Trump documentary. This is clearly painting him in not a very positive light, and the title "Unfit" is actually guiding the viewer to that determination rather than letting the viewer make up their mind. It's not unfit ? It's unfit #. So it's activism documentary making, and there's a strong legacy, there's a strong history of it, and sometimes you actually need to put forward a controversial point of view to begin the conversation rather than be like, oh, he's good on these things, but he's not so good on these things. That's not very compelling viewing. So you kind of, to start a conversation, sometimes you need to take a polarizing point of view. Um, but
I hope that
yeah,
answers the question.
yeah. Cool. Okay. Do we have any further questions from South Tees or any of the high schools there? I think we've got a 15-second delay. Well, we're pretty much at time anyway. If you have any further questions, you can email them to Matthew@docedge.nz or Alicia, and you can follow up with Danny as necessary. But thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in and jumping through all of these technical hoops. I know it's not been an easy an easy process where usually you just turn up to the theatre and we'd push play. But we definitely want to thank South Seas and Onslow College, Auckland Uni Psychology Department, Kamor High, and particularly you, Danny, for giving your insight and your experience to this conversation, to you, Alicia, for all of the moderation, and to Ray Foundation particularly, it's all possible. So we look forward to our final session this time next week. Tell your friends, if they're students, hassle your teachers to jump on board. You'll get more insight from all of the speakers here. But for the moment, enjoy your afternoon, and we'll catch you for the next session.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.